This lad o' mine, sort of cousin he is, comes from London, like you and me. Has always had, ever since he landed in this country, a most amazing knack of stowing away grub. He'd been a bit underfed these last 2 or 3 years over in the old country, what with food restrictions and all, and he took to the food over here amazing. I'd have backed him against a ruddy ostrich. Ostrich! I'd have backed him against 1/2 ostriches. Take 'em on one after the other, and the same ring on the same evening, and given 'em a handicap too. He was a jewel, that boy. I've seen him polish off 4 pounds of steak and mealy potatoes, and then look round kind of wolfish, as much as to ask when dinner was going to begin. That's the kind of lad he was, till this very morning. He would have out-swallowed this here O'Dowd without turning a hair, as a relish before his tea. I got a couple of $100 on him, and I thought myself lucky to get the odds. And now—" Mr. Blake relapsed into a tortured silence. "But what's the matter with the blighter? Why can't he go over the top? Has he got indigestion?" "Indigestion?" Mr. Blake laughed another of his hollow laughs. "You couldn't give that boy indigestion if you fed him on safety razor blades. Religion's more like what he's got." "Religion?" "Well, you can call it that. Seems last night, instead of going and resting his mind at a picture palace like I told him to, he sneaked off to some sort of a lecture down on 8th Avenue. He said he'd seen a piece about it in the papers, and it was about rational eatin', and that kind of attracted him. He sort of thought he might pick up a few hints like. He didn't know what rational eatin' was, but it sounded to him as if it must be something to do with food, and he didn't want to miss it. He came in here just now," said Mr. Blake, dully, "and he was a changed lad. Scared to death he was. Said the way he'd been going on in the past, it was a wonder he'd got any stomach left. It was a lady that gave the lecture, and this boy said it was amazing that she told him about blood pressure and things he didn't even know he had. She showed him pictures, coloured pictures, of what happens inside the injudicious eater's stomach who doesn't chew his food, and it was like a battlefield. He said he would no more think of eating a lot of pie than he would of shooting himself, and anyhow eating pie would be a quicker death. I reasoned with him, Mr. Moon, with tears in my eyes. I asked him was he going to chuck away fame and wealth just because a woman who didn't know what she was talking about had showed him a lot of faked pictures. But there wasn't any doing anything with him. He gave me the knock and upped it down the street to buy nuts." Mr. Blake moaned. $200 and more gone pop, not to talk of the $50 he would have won and me to get 25 of. Archie took his tobacco and walked pensively back to the hotel. He was fond of John Blake, and grieved for the trouble that had come upon him. It was odd, he felt, how things seemed to link themselves up together. The woman who had delivered the fateful lecture to injudicious eaters could not be other than the mother of his young guest of last night. An uncomfortable woman, not content with starving her own family. Archie stopped in his tracks. A pedestrian, walking behind him, charged into his back, but Archie paid no attention. He had had one of those sudden, luminous ideas, which help a man who does not do much thinking as a rule to restore his average. He stood there for a moment, almost dizzy at the brilliance of his thoughts, then hurried on. Napoleon, he mused as he walked, must have felt rather like this after thinking up a hot one to spring on the enemy. As if destiny were suiting her plans to his, one of the first persons he saw as he entered the lobby of the Cosmopolis was the Long Boy. He was standing at the bookstall, reading as much of a morning paper as could be read free under the vigilant eyes of the presiding girl. Both he and she were observing the unwritten rules which govern these affairs, to wit, that you may read without interference as much as can be read without touching the paper. If you touch the paper, you lose, and you have to buy. "Well, well, well," said Archie. "Here we are again, what?" He prodded the boy amiably in the lower ribs. You're just the chap I was looking for. Got anything on for the time being?" The boy said he had no engagements. "Then I want you to stagger round with me to a chappie I know on 6th Avenue. It's only a couple of blocks away. I think I can do you a bit of good. Put you onto something tolerably ripe, if you know what I mean. Trickle along, laddie. You don't need a hat." They found Mr. Blake brooding over his troubles in an empty shop. "Cheer up, old thing," said Archie. "The relief expedition has arrived." He directed his companion's gaze to the poster. "Cast your eyes over that. How does that strike you?" The long boy scanned the poster. A gleam appeared in his rather dull eye. "Well?" "Some people have all the luck," said the long boy, feelingly. "Would you like to compete, what?" The boy smiled a sad smile. "Would I? Would I? Say—" "I know," interrupted Archie. "Wake you up in the night and ask you. I knew I could rely on you, old thing." He turned to Mr. Blake. "Here's the fellow you've been wanting to meet. The finest left and right-hand eater east of the Rockies. He'll fight the good fight for you." Mr. Blake's English training had not been wholly overcome by residence in New York. He still retained a nice eye for the distinctions of class. "But this young gentleman's a young gentleman," he urged, doubtfully, yet with hope shining in his eye. "He wouldn't do it." "Of course he would. Don't be ridic, old thing." "Wouldn't do what?" asked the boy. "Why save the old homestead by taking on the champion? Dashed sad case between ourselves. This poor egg's nominee has given him the raspberry at the 11th hour, and only you can save him. And you owe it to him to do something, you know, because it was your jolly old mater's lecture last night that made the nominee quit. You must charge in and take his place. Sort of poetic justice, don't you know, and what not." He turned to Mr. Blake. "When is the conflict supposed to start? 2:30? You haven't any important engagement for 2:30, have you?" "No. Mother's lunching at some ladies' club, giving a lecture afterwards. I can slip away." Archie patted his head. "Then leg it where glory waits you, old bean." The long boy was gazing earnestly at the poster. It seemed to fascinate him. "Pie," he said in a hushed voice. The word was like a battle cry. End of chapter 21.